We're talking today with Dr. Brian Linn, who's professor of history at Texas A&M. Brian's the author of a number of books. One of his most recent, I guess, is The Echo of Battle, The Army Way of War, which is a subject really close to my heart, Brian, how the Army got off track in the 1990s and then is getting back on at this time. But today we really want to talk to him about one of his earlier books, The U.S. Army and Counterinsurgency in the Philippine War, 1899 to 1902. Sounds dry, but it's up to the moment. Brian, thanks for being with us.
Well, great to be here, Dave. Thanks a lot.
Well, start out by putting us in the time and place. Where are we in time? Where are we in geography when the Army goes to war in the Philippines?
It's 1898. There's been what some people would call a terrorist attack on the USS Maine, which is in Havana Harbor. The huge popular outcry, a president who initially doesn't want to go to war, but is swept along and almost has the danger of Congress declaring war without him, a mass mobilization, great popular enthusiasm, and as sort of a sidelight to this, the Navy squadron, which is out in the Far East, goes off to attack the Spanish base in the Philippines and knocks out the fleet. And then the question for President McKinley is, what do I do with the Philippines?
So we have a big media push moving us toward respond to this outrageous terrorist attack, not unlike what happened to the USS Cole several years ago. We have an oppressive government that the argument is in the press that they are oppressing their own people. That's the Spanish government oppressing the people in Cuba. And there's truth to that.
Oh, yes. I don't know if we'd necessarily use the term genocide, but there's a very barbarous campaign being waged by Spanish in Cuba. Killed tens of thousands of people and depopulated entire areas.
And so when the United States Army and Navy, along with Theodore Roosevelt among others, shows up in Cuba and defeats the Spanish forces, they are in many respects, I guess you would call, a liberating force.
Yes, and in fact, to the credit of the United States, it actually set up a new government and then withdrew. But in the meantime,
we have this diversion a half a world away.
And this is sort of how one war leads to another. McKinley decided to send an expedition out to the Philippines. They found out that there was a Filipino nationalist movement already there, which had its own plans to declare an independent Philippines. We first defeated the Spanish at Manila, and then within about 3 months we're at war with the Philippine nationalist movement.
Now there are numbers for listeners, I hope they're beginning to hear a number of points that resonate here. When we get to the Philippines, there's both a moral commitment, there's also a very important geographic reason for us being in the Philippines. How about talk about those two things, would you?
The moral commitment was, as McKinley said, that it was sort of the golden apple of discord, that if he couldn't give it back to the Spanish because after we all knew what the Spanish were capable of after Cuba, he did not think he could give it to the Philippine nationalists under Emilio Aguinaldo, who he regarded as a sort of terrorist, a warlord, and a member of a tribe that would oppress everybody else. And he couldn't really turn it over to the Europeans because there was a great deal of imperial rivalry at that time, and if he gave it to the Germans, the British and the French would object. And finally, there's the great question of China and the Far Eastern trade out there. And so the Philippines were an area where McKinley, once having it, did not think he could turn it over to anyone else.
So there is a real resonance here with the situation in Afghanistan and especially in Iraq, where geographically we have an area that's extremely important and has access to natural resources and can act, if we use it properly, as something of a bulwark among other major powers in the area.
Yes, and there's also, as you mentioned, this sort of moral, I mean, there's a strategic issue that if you were out there, you could exert military power in the Far East. Hopefully you could open up the China market more, so there's an economic argument. And finally, there's a moral argument. And I'm not sure if this is true, but there's an apocryphal story that McKinley said that one of the missions the United States had was to Christianize the Philippines. Now, they already were Roman Catholic, but there is a sort of missionary impulse to sort of take over the Philippines and use that in a way to exert American values and American culture throughout the Far East.